partnership with Lakes Media Collaborative and the Brainerd Lakes Chamber. It's my pleasure to welcome Paul Gazelka. Paul is a candidate for the Republican Party for State Senate District 9. Paul, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
It's great to have you here. Why don't you go ahead with your opening comments?
Well, I'm Paul Gazelka. I'm up for re-election. I can tell you that my wife and I, Marilee, and I should say, live in Cass County, north of Pillager in Fairview Township. In the last election cycle, we had to deal with a very, very tough budget. We were $6 billion short, and we wanted to figure out a way to balance the budget without raising taxes. We looked at a variety of other issues. One of the big areas that we focused on was how to help the private sector grow jobs. And so we looked at many areas related to that to, again, focus on, can we create jobs in Minnesota? Can we create jobs in rural Minnesota? And I guess I'd have to say, look at the record. Did we do what we said we were going to do? And in the end, we did balance the budget. Right now, we have a $1 billion surplus, so we had a $7 billion turnaround as a result of our efforts there. Our unemployment rates, though not where we need them to be, are 2% better than the national average, and so that's good news, but we've got a lot more work to do there. I can tell you that I also said I would focus on what I call central Minnesota values of being pro-life and standing up for marriage and Second Amendment rights and photo ID. Those are all things that we worked on the Capitol. And what I would say is, if you re-elect me, you can expect more of the same. I'm going to continue to work on reining in runaway government spending and look to reforms to make it more efficient. The private sector has to become better. In Minnesota, we rank 45th out of 50 in helping the business owner, and so we want to help them create jobs. And if we can cut the red tape so that they get out there and produce more jobs, that's a good thing for all of us. So really happy to be here and answer the questions, and thanks for taking the time to listen.
Paul, it's great to have you here as well. Let's start by talking about what makes you different. Give us 3 things that distinguish you from the other candidate.
Well, probably the biggest thing is how we're going to handle budget shortfalls and spending. And in the last debates, my opponent was the representative, and he said that with that shortfall that we should have a balanced approach, which meant increasing taxes, and they didn't really talk about much spending decreases. Our approach always has been that we have enough money and that we have to learn to live within our means. And so that would probably be one of the most major differences, is we're not looking to any area of tax increases. We know that if we slow the growth of spending and live within our means, we can get where we need to be. I think on some of the social issues, we're going to be a little different. I support photo ID for voting. My opponent, I believe, does not. I will have the MCCL endorsement for pro-life. So we're different on that one. The marriage amendment, I don't know if we're different or not. But on the social issues, we're a little different. Certainly our parties are very different. On job creation, I'm looking to the private sector for solutions for job growth. I don't want to expand state government in any way. If the private sector grows jobs, more taxes come into the state, and we're all doing better. So those are probably 3 significant areas where you'd find that we're different.
You touched on job growth, private sector growth. Can you give us a little more detail? What are your thoughts? What's your strategy on helping grow Minnesota's economy?
Well, the private sector is the key, as I talked about in the beginning, and ranking 45 out of 50 for how a state treats their businesses is terrible. One of the key areas that we need to work on is our tax code. Minnesota business taxes are among the worst in the country. Property taxes for businesses, a small business pays 1.5 to 2 times what a resident would for the same building value, and then the state grabs another 30% above that on them. So that one we have to work on. Cutting the red tape is a simple way to say bureaucracy is killing our businesses, and anybody that's had to work with the government on trying to get a permit for something knows what I'm talking about. But if you're a business, that's a big deal. I mean, look at the mines in northeast Minnesota. They've already been waiting 7 years to drill copper, nickel, and to create that industry, which would create 10,000 jobs. And so we're working to cut that red tape and speed up the process. And finally, tort reform. That's an area where businesses can be sued, and they go back, I believe it's 7 years. The average around the country is about 3 years, so we need to improve that as well.
Okay. You were involved with the last biennium in terms of balancing the state budget. What are your recommendations for balancing the state budget in the next biennium?
Again, it's not spending more than you have. This last budget, before we took over, the budget was $30 billion, and they wanted to spend $39 billion. We had $34 billion in the checkbook, and so we said we'll spend that. And so besides saying we're not going to spend more than we have to look towards reforms. And so one of the things we did, for example, to save money was look at IT, the technology, and every agency has their own IT department. We passed legislation to merge them all to make that more efficient. And then the second thing we're doing is we're asking private companies to come in and look at how Minnesota does business. Companies like IBM, a Minnesota company, to see if they can save us money. They look at things like fleet management, tax analytics, building costs, and they've done this around the country and saved as much as $400 million for states. We're asking them to do the same thing to save money for us in Minnesota.
Okay, we've got 3 more questions we want to roll through, so we're going to make this quick. Talk about transportation. Rural Minnesota, very important. What's your strategy with transportation in Minnesota?
You know, there's a tug-of-war between metro and rural, at least for me there is. In rural, we want to put more money towards roads and bridges. In metro, they tend to focus more on transit. I really think the answers for the whole state are more roads and bridges. Even in the Twin Cities, they can add lanes without even adding more asphalt. And so that's where my focus is going to be. I serve on the Transportation Committee. That's a big, important issue for businesses, is that they have a good road structure or road grid, and so I'll work on it in that direction.
Okay. Education is important to rural Minnesota. What do you think is the state's role in workforce development?
Well, education, just to let you know what we did, that was part of the budget shutdown. There was actually another school shift, but we began to pay that back and should have all that paid back by the end of November. But we're looking at reforming. We want education to get into the next century, be with where we're heading. And so we looked at, for example, and passed alternative pathways for teacher licensing to bring the best and brightest. One of the things we tried to pass, but the governor vetoed, was LIFO, or basically if a school district wanted to keep a teacher based on their ability rather than their seniority, they could. Right now it's based on seniority. The longer you've been in there, you're just not going to be let go, even if you're not performing well. And so we're looking at reforming education. The question has to be what's best for the student first, not the rest of us. And if we can find the answers there, we will.
Okay, last question relates to healthcare. Minnesota's healthcare spending is expected to double in the next 10 years. How would you control the rising cost of healthcare?
Healthcare is really complicated because you have the aging of our population and a demand for the latest, greatest technology, and both of those things drive up the cost. The biggest thing that we have to do is the consumer has to be involved in that whole process. One of the things that really works is when people take a high deductible plan and take the rest of that savings versus a low deductible plan and put it in a health savings account. And then when their efforts are to live more of a healthy lifestyle, and when they do, they're rewarded because they have more money in that health savings account. But in the end, we all have to be engaged in this. We don't know whether Obamacare is going to go all the way through or not, and that really is the first thing we have to see before we move forward. Okay,
we are down to 10 seconds. Anything else you want to add real quickly?
I just appreciate the opportunity to serve you over the last couple of years, and I hope you give me an opportunity to serve again. Thank you.
Paul, thanks for joining us, and thank you for watching Candid Conversations with Candidates. You can see this and other interviews at votebrainerdlakes.com. And remember, vote November 6th.